Hi, I'm Boyd Peterson. I'm the author of a book called Tales of Bethlehem. And in this book, there are several stories about people that were around at the time of Christ's birth. And these stories that I'm telling are going to be those that I have recreated or put together from information I have heard, and some of it is fiction. So please take it with a grain of salt if that's what you want. But these are inspirational. Today, I'm going to be giving the story of David, and we call this the music for a king. And it's three events that shaped the life of another shepherd. Now, David, you may remember from my last story, he was the son of Jeremiah, and we'll go on with there. Have you ever witnessed an event, one that somehow takes you back in time to another event that was both pleasant and inspirational? This happened to me not long ago, and now I am writing about both events. I am David, the second son of Jeremiah. I am the shepherd teacher for the temple shepherds and others that wish to learn about our God and the teachings of the prophets. As part of my service and position, I make a weekly trip to Jerusalem to take the lambs and sheep that will be used for sacred sacrifices in the temple. The nature of the sacrifices changes from time to time, but the most important of the sacrifices is done during the celebration of Passover. Last week was the Passover celebration, and I chose from among the newborn lambs one which was the firstborn of a ewe, was pure white and worthy of the sacrifice and celebration of the passing over of the destroying angel in Egypt so many centuries ago. As I arrived in Jerusalem, it was a festive atmosphere. Many people were in the streets. The sounds were echoing from the walls, and sometimes it was deafening. Crowds were everywhere. From the moment I entered the gates of the city until I got to the pen at the temple, people thronged the streets. And it was a good thing for me that I had help getting the lambs to the temple. The pen that I delivered the sheep to is just outside the rear of the temple and is shielded from the sides as to not take away from the temple. The sounds coming from the temple grounds are so noisy when we are within the animal shelter, and the shouting of the vendors and the noise of the crowd can be deafening, even from outside the wall of the temple. The temple is built with a wall around it where people may come inside the grounds to contemplate, pray, and think about the wonders of God. It is supposed to be a sacred location. Over the years, however, Jerusalem has grown and the temple grounds have become a trading area for sacrificial animals for the temple ceremonies. People come from many areas of Israel, and their monies need to be exchanged to pay the vendors. There is little space in the city for marketplaces now, so merchants of all kinds have filled the temple grounds. I just delivered the lambs to the temple pen and was making my way around the side of the temple grounds when, to my surprise, people were running out of the gates, and a commotion inside caught my attention. It was a true stampede. The dust from the escaping crowd made it hard to see what was going on, but one woman that was running fell just after leaving the gates and was in danger of being trampled. From the side, a man stepped out, caught her arm, pulling her from under the feet of the crowd. He helped her to her feet and set her against the wall to recover. Then he tried to slow the flow of people exiting. I myself made my way to the gates, and as the crowd slowed down, he and I slipped inside. People were still scrambling to get out, and some looked as though their lives depended on leaving. Others were just watching what was going on. The commotion came from a man who seemed upset by the vendors being in the temple grounds. He had turned the tables over, and many of the animals had escaped from their cages and the cords that were binding them. Because of the suddenness of his actions, many people were running from before the man. Merchants were scrambling to recover their goods. Many of the birds were flying around and away. As the man finished turning over the tables, he began to chase the merchants and the buyers out of the temple grounds. A few stood their ground, but as the man approached, his stature and determination warned them that he was not someone to defy. As the last of the merchants left, the man stood in the middle of the grounds, looking toward the temple. He was dressed like a traveler, was tall, well built, and had a way about him that I cannot explain. He was almost regal in his attitude, and he spoke with authority. He looked at the remaining people that were watching him, and his eyes teared up. He spoke, "My house shall be called a house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." The crowd was so quiet, it was almost like there was no one else there. The grounds only had a few people left, and all those were silent. There weren't even the sounds of birds or others from without the walls to disturb the now serene temple grounds. Soon people outside the temple, who were just as curious as those were inside, slipped in to see what was going to happen next, and they began to fill back in. The man then called for the blind and the lame that were outside the gates of the temple to come in. He laid his hands upon their heads, and one by one, he healed them, all of them. He looked at me and gave me a nod, and then I knew who he was. He was Jesus of Nazareth, the same that I had seen more than 33 seasons before when he was born. I knew that he was the Messiah and felt his sweet spirit flood over me, and I remembered that event so long ago. I had seen him a few times since he was a baby, but had not recognized him this time until now. It was while Jesus was blessing the sick that the chief priests and the scribes came out of the temple to put a stop to what was happening. As they looked at the crowd, they did not know what to do. This Jesus was performing miracles and began to bless the children. The children began to chant, "Hosanna to the Son of David." As Jesus finished, he turned toward the priest and again said, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves." He lowered his head, shook it in dismay and disgust. Jesus then sat on the steps of the temple amidst the clutter of tossed tables, broken and empty cages, fruits, breads, money, and merchandise, all left by the vendors. Sitting just below the chief priests, he began to teach the people, ignoring the priests behind him. He spoke with such authority that the priests were astonished at his way of teaching the people. They whispered among themselves, but clearly were at a loss as to what to do. The temple grounds were again filled, but this time those who returned had a new reverence for the temple and its grounds. That sweet spirit that I spoke of earlier came again, and the people were moved to sit and listen to the master. I glanced around and saw the man that had helped the woman who was about to be trampled, and I realized it was my childhood friend, Didymus. He was standing against one of the walls with several other men, some of whom I recognized as the disciples of Jesus. I had met several of them over the years as Jesus came through our grazing lands. Jesus loved to stop for a rest on the hills overlooking the pastures as the sheep grazed, and he would teach both us, the shepherds, and his disciples. He would use the sheep as part of the stories and teachings he would deliver. I had learned from him how to teach in ways that all could understand. He was a true teacher and could put the right message into the stories to both entertain and to inspire. I made my way to Didymus, who threw his arms around me, filled with joy that we were there together. We rested against the wall of the temple grounds as we listened to Jesus teach the people with stories of common things that had great meanings for those that understood. As he spoke today, I remember the night with the angels and seeing the newborn babe in a manger, and the many times I saw him before he and his family left for Egypt. It was my friend Didymus and I that had the honor of performing for the baby king. It all began about 2 years before the coming of the Lord, when I was but 6 seasons old, and my father took me to Jerusalem with him to take the sacrificial sheep to the temple. As we were leaving, I saw a beggar boy by the gate to the temple asking for alms. He was a few years older than I, and seemed to be in good health. I stopped to talk to him and asked him why he was begging for food and money. He said that his mother had just left this life and he had no relatives. He was from a town called Bethlehem, which was near where we were tending sheep. As we were leaving, I asked if he would like to travel with us back to Bethlehem. He agreed, and during that half-day trip to our camps, we talked and talked. As we came to the shepherd's encampment, he pulled out a musical instrument called a flute. It had several pieces of round wood, hollowed out of different lengths, that were all tied together and kept in a row by a stick with a leather thong. As he played, it was so magical that I fell in love with the music it made. I determined to make myself one. As we arrived at our humble home, my father invited Didymus to stay. He did, and for several weeks he dwelt with us and was a great help to the shepherds. He learned how to defend the sheep from predators, and he taught us about how music calms the sheep and calls them to the music maker. We found that when he played the flute, the animals would come running from wherever they were, and as he continued to play, they would lie down and just listen. His music worked especially well to call all the sheep together for the night. It was like magic. It was also better than the shepherds calling out for their flocks because the music carried much farther than a voice could. Didymus taught me to play the flute, and we learned to play together, using different tones to make the music even more pleasing. We had great fun, and the sheep loved them when we would come to the fields and play. They would gather around every time we practiced. Didymus made the trip to Bethlehem from time to time to look for any family that might have come looking for him or his mother, but he always came back alone. He also traveled to Jerusalem to look for work to earn money. One day, when my father was also in Jerusalem, he told Didymus to play his flute and told him that he would make more money. As he began to play, my father said, the street became calm from the bustle of the day, and the people were amazed at the music he could play. Didymus made more money that day than he had ever made in a week. It was that day that my father invited Didymus to come stay with the shepherds and become a shepherd. He was good with the sheep, and one of the families that helped with the tending of the sheep were without children and would welcome him as part of their family. Didymus agreed and returned with my father to our camp. That was the autumn before the birth of Christ. My father's account of the angel visit and the hosts of angels singing are in his journal. I now retell that story for the shepherds each year since becoming the shepherd teacher. My father told it each year before I took over from him. What my father didn't know until later was that Didymus and I were outside that night, between the camp and where the shepherds were gathered to prepare for the night. While we didn't hear the angels speak to those who were there, we did see the light and heard the music from the chorus that sang to them. The music was so beautiful and peaceful. They sang for a very long time, and many times they sang, Hallelujah to God and his Son. Glory to God in the highest. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. Another song was about a king that had come and how the prophets had foretold of his coming. There was also a song about a plan for salvation and a son that said he would come to serve us. The melodies were strange to us, but they had stayed with both of us even to this day. I had the honor of going with my father to see the newborn king, but Didymus had to stay behind while his father went with us. While I was there with Mary and Joseph, I began to hum one of the tunes I had heard from the angels. As I did, both Mary and Joseph looked at me and said they had heard that melody before, but only in dreams. As my father explained about the angel visit, I continued to hum to the baby Jesus, and he smiled at me as he knew what it meant. Now that I am a father myself, I know what it is like for a newborn and smiling isn't something they can do right away. Yet this baby was special. I knew that he was smiling at me. What a peace I had come over me as I hummed away. As I hummed, I could hear those angels yet again singing the praises in song, and I looked around to see where the new music was coming from. The other shepherds in the family of Jesus also heard the singing that went from my humming, but no one knew where it came from. The next day, as I recounted this to Didymus, he and I agreed to create the music on our flutes to play to the baby Jesus and his family. We practiced every day for a week before we could talk my father into letting us go with him and one of the other shepherds to see Jesus and his parents again. I'm going to pause now, and the continuation of this story will be given tomorrow. So please listen to it then.